What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of History's Deepest Mysteries that are about to blow your mind. Today, we're not just talking about any ordinary topic. Oh no, we're diving deep into a story that could have reshaped the world as we know it. Get ready, grab your coffee, and focus because what I'm about to tell you, you won't hear anywhere else. Just imagine a world that was completely different. Powerful civilizations suddenly vanished, and people erased from history as if they never existed. That's what we're going to uncover today. We're not skipping a single word, and we'll tell you every detail that will leave you asking, what exactly is going on? Guys, there was a civilization called Tartaria. This wasn't just any civilization, it was magnificent. There were mighty rulers like Genghis Khan from 1155 to 1227, a name that still sends shivers down your spine. But what's his real story with these Tartars? Tamerlane, from 1336 to 1405, the conqueror of the world? Was he just an ordinary ruler or part of something much, much bigger? Batu Khan, from 1227 to 1502, a name you might not have heard much about, but he's a crucial part of this mysterious Tartarian tale. Not only that, the story mentions the Tartarian Russian royal family, the Tsars themselves. It's said that between 1850 and 1914, there were figures like Prince and Princess Sherbatov, Colonel Bernov, and the captain of the Imperial Guard. So the Tartars were actually ruling Russia? Wait, this is wild. And when we talk about the elegant and beautiful women of Tartary, the description says they were super chic in 1900, even when going to the beach. This means these were sophisticated, civilized people, not just primitives as history tries to make us believe. So what happened to all these people? Where did they go? Here, the story opens up a whole new world. It claims that the original Moors, just like the original Egyptians, were black Africans. It cites writings from Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe in the 16th century, who used the word Moor to mean African. This means the story is much bigger than just Africans living in Africa. Not only that, black soldiers called Moors were recruited from Rome and served all over Europe. Imagine the impact. It continues to state that the contributions of these Moors in mathematics, astronomy, art, and agriculture in Al-Andalus from 711 AD to 1492 AD helped Europe emerge from the Dark Ages and enter the Renaissance. It's said that education was universal in Moorish Spain, with 17 universities and over 70 public libraries, and the Library of Córdoba alone had hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. At that time, Christian Europe had only 2 universities, and most of its population was illiterate. This kind of information makes you question everything you learned in school. Here's where the story gets chilling. It claims that the Sphinx's nose was broken during Napoleon's occupation of Egypt, citing a French researcher, Count C. Volney, who visited Egypt in the late 18th century and stated that the Sphinx's head features were typically negroid. It adds that the oldest statues of Osiris and Isis in ancient Egypt also had missing or damaged noses. Who did this and why? It's alleged that European invaders who came to ancient Egypt over the centuries removed the noses of these statues and altered their faces to appear Caucasian. This points to systematic attempts to erase an entire identity. Even the Romanov dynasties, who ruled Russia, distorted statues to eliminate any heritage they didn't want. This isn't just a war, it's a war on history itself. Here, the story directly challenges the traditional narrative of the slave trade. It states that the claim that black people were forcibly transported from Africa to the Americas is untrue. It argues that these black people were originally the indigenous inhabitants of the Americas and were enslaved on their own lands, so they weren't brought from elsewhere. It also claims that the numbers of Africans said to have been transported, 15 to 20 million, are grossly exaggerated, and that there is no historical, archaeological, or anthropological evidence to prove that all black people in the Americas originated from West and North Africa. It asserts that the out-of-Africa theory was created by a European anthropologist named Melville Herskovits, who the story claims formulated this theory without evidence. And it reveals an even bigger surprise. Over 83% of African Americans have Native American blood. Stewart's summary raises logical questions that will make you pause. It asks, how could 60,000 slaves be transported every year for 300 years? That would mean 18 million slaves in the Americas by 1860 alone. If 60,000 slaves were transported annually and the average mortality rate was 30%, then 18 million slaves would have died in the Atlantic Ocean. This means the ocean would have been a massive graveyard. The alleged number of voyages over 300 years, 30,586 voyages, means that only one ship sailed every 10 or 11 days from Africa to the Americas. One ship every 10 days would never be enough to transport these numbers. The story also lists the names of original black tribes that existed in the Americas: the Washita, Yamasee, Iroquois, Cherokee. Over 200,000 African Americans have Cherokee ancestry, Blackfoot, Pequot, Mohegan, Black Californians, Olmec, and Darien. This implies an entire history has been erased from existence. Here, the story disputes the claims that 4.25 million African slaves were transported to Brazil and Mexico. It states that while Brazil is alleged to have imported about 4 million slaves, 40% of the total slave trade, mostly from Angola, and Mexico imported 186,766 Africans, these numbers are questionable based on the appearance of modern Mexicans. It also mentions Valongo Wharf in Brazil, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, stating it was the main slave port in South America, bringing in 900,000 African slaves between 1811 and 1831. So, well-known existing places. But are these numbers truly logical? The story presents a theory that will make you rethink every map you've ever seen. It claims that America is the Old World, and it asserts that Columbus's first voyage was the final crusade to conquer the holy lands of Mexico and Peru. Look at these strange terms that the story reveals. Teotihuacan means City of Thoth. Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, means City of Enoch. Mexico itself was named after Moses, and the Old Testament takes place in the Americas. Utah, Judah, has the city of Moab, and the Great Salt Lake is the Dead Sea. The biggest surprise is that there are more pyramids and massive structures in the Americas than anywhere else in the world, even more than in the Nile Valley. This means there are pyramids just like, and even more than, those we see in Egypt right here in America. The story concludes this section with a sentence that will freeze you in your tracks. The Negro is the Indian, or the indigenous copper-colored people of the Americas. It states that words like Negro, Indian, and colored were all synonyms. This suggests racial classifications were attempts to obscure people's origins. The story takes us deep into history, stating that the Olmec were the mother culture of pre-Hispanic Mexico, preceding the Maya and Aztec civilizations by 1,500 and 2,000 years. This makes them the oldest civilized society in Mesoamerica before Columbus. It states that the Olmec influence spread throughout Mesoamerica, affecting art, architecture, and religious rituals. It describes the colossal Olmec heads as carved basalt boulders, depicting mature individuals with full faces, flat noses, and slightly crossed eyes, features still common in the people of Tabasco and Veracruz. It talks about Tollan, the capital of the ancient Toltec Empire, which was a legendary Aztec city, famous for its palaces and buildings made of gold, silver, and jade. It claims that the Toltec mastered nature, producing huge corn crops and naturally colored cotton, and were skilled in all crafts. And Tollan is also known as the city of the Atlanteans. The influence of this Toltec civilization spread throughout Yucatan, and Atlanteans were found in the Temple of the Warriors there. It states that the end of the Toltec civilization was marked by the fall of Tula to northern invaders sometime in the 12th century. The story also reveals a crucial piece of information. Mexico's second and only black president was Vicente Guerrero. This man was a major military leader in Mexico's War of Independence, and as president, he abolished slavery in his nation on September 15, 1829. History seems to hide important facts like these. And now, the most chilling part of the narrative, the orphan trains and 19th century asylums. Imagine this, folks. Before the American Civil War, something called orphan trains started. Over 250,000 children were transported from New York to the Midwest between 1853 and 1929. This was the largest mass migration of children in American history. A quarter of these children were Irish. Some abolitionists were concerned that these trains were being used as an extension of slavery, and their fear was justified. Many of these children weren't adopted and became slaves to farmers, victims of abuse, or indentured servants with no rights or freedoms. These children, bless their hearts, were subjected to sexual abuse, mistreatment, malnutrition, and overwork on Midwest farms. Trains would stop in towns, and children would be paraded before assembled townspeople, often on hastily constructed stages. Locals would inspect them, feel their muscles, check their teeth, and question them. Communication between the children and their families back east was strictly prohibited. Many of these children ran away from their abusive new homes. These abandoned children were left to their own devices to find shelter and food, often stealing, begging, or selling matches. In the mid-19th and early 20th centuries, these problems escalated, leading a reverend named Charles Loring Brace to establish the Children's Aid Society in 1853. In the 1870s, the Catholic Church became concerned that many Catholic children were being sent to Protestant homes, so they started their own railway program. They would notify priests in towns along the railway line that a certain asylum had children needing homes. The priest would announce it at Sunday Mass, and adults would sign up to take a child, even specifying gender and hair eye color. It was common for these children to be separated from their siblings, have no birth certificates, and no contact with their parents or siblings. Sometimes a baptism certificate was the only legal document. When they turned 18, they would leave their indenture agreement and were expected to manage their own lives. The story mentions something even stranger called foundling wheels. These were established by a papal decree from Pope Innocent III in the 12th century because he was horrified by the number of dead children he found in the Tiber River. This wheel was a rotating wooden barrel built into a wall, usually at a monastery, allowing women to deposit their infants without being seen. These wheels spread across Europe and were used until the late 19th century. Even in modern times, foundling wheels have reappeared in parts of Europe, especially in Germany, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic. In America, since 1999, baby hatches have started, with Indiana launching one in 2016. All 50 states have passed safe haven laws since Texas began on September 1, 1999. These laws allow parents to anonymously leave newborns, less than 72 hours old, at designated locations like fire stations, police stations, and hospitals. The story explains that the wheel was a kind of lazy Susan with a small platform where you'd place the baby and rotate it inside the building without being seen. Then you'd pull a cord that rang a bell inside to alert those within that a baby was there. In large cities, these children were baptized and kept in foundling homes, with wet nurses to feed them. They might stay for years until townspeople took them as servants or laborers, or they were placed with foster families. Sadly, it was more likely that they never left the institution and died from malnutrition or disease. In smaller towns, the wheel might be at a midwife's house. Here, the story poses a mind-bending question. Did the New World Order, NWO, seize control of Tartarian buildings and use them to exterminate Tartarian populations worldwide after placing them in converted asylums? The claim here is, the evidence appears to overwhelmingly support this. In London, England, the Priory of St. Mary of Bethlehem, notoriously known as Bedlam, was founded in 1247. In Spain, other institutions for the mentally ill were established after the Christian Reconquista, including hospitals in Valencia, 1407, Zaragoza, 1425, Seville, 1436, Barcelona, 1481, and Toledo, 1483. In Britain, at the start of the 19th century, there were perhaps a few thousand lunatics scattered across various institutions. However, by the start of the 20th century, that number had swelled to 100,000. This coincided with the development of Western therapy, now modern psychiatry, as a medical specialty. By the end of the 19th century, national systems of organized asylums for the mentally ill existed in most industrialized nations. At the turn of the century, the number of asylum inmates in Britain and France combined was only a few hundred, but by the end of the century, it had reached hundreds of thousands. America housed 150,000 patients in mental hospitals by 1904, and Germany had over 400 public and private asylums. These asylums were crucial to the development of psychiatry as they provided widespread practice locations. The strange thing is that in all these asylums around the world, we see familiar patterns of impressive Tartarian architecture, and many of these asylums had farms, livestock, cemeteries, and crematories on site. Another important point, most of these structures became overcrowded by the early 20th century, hence the need for more asylums. But the population numbers at the time didn't justify the immense size of these buildings or the number of people said to have been confined in them. In California, for example, at the beginning of the gold rush in 1849, many of these mental asylums were established to accommodate those considered insane as early as 1851, even though California's population by no means justified the immense size and scope of these structures. And the other striking observation that these massive mental asylums are almost identical in appearance across the globe in what is called Gothic and Romanesque architecture. It's claimed that the Hospital of the Innocents in Valencia, Spain in 1410 was the first asylum in Europe, noted for its originality and historical/cultural reasons to be described as the first. Furthermore, the spread of the organization and operation of this institution and its model was very rapid throughout the Iberian Peninsula and also in Spanish-speaking countries in America. Then it discusses Bethlehem Royal Hospital in Britain, England, 1676. Bethlehem Royal Hospital, also known as St. Mary Bethlehem, Bethlehem Hospital, and Bedlam, is a psychiatric hospital in London. Its history has inspired many horror books, films, and TV series, most famously the 1946 film Bedlam, starring Boris Karloff. The hospital is associated with King's College London and is a major center for psychiatric research. The hospital was originally located near Bishopsgate, outside the walls of the City of London, where the NWO bankers reside. Also, St. Luke's Hospital for Lunatics in London, 1751, established for the treatment of poor, incurably insane people by a group of benevolent pharmacists. This was the second public institution in London created to care for the mentally ill, after Bedlam. Treatment to their existing wings for psychiatric patients. But the Friends Asylum, established by the Quaker community in Philadelphia in 1814, was the first institution specifically built to implement the full moral treatment program. The Massachusetts General Hospital built McLean Hospital outside Boston in 1811. The New York Hospital built its Bloomingdale Insane Asylum in Morningside Heights in Upper Manhattan in 1816. And the Pennsylvania Hospital created the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital across the river from the city in 1841.
Dr. Thomas Kirkbride, the influential medical superintendent of the institute, developed what quickly became known as the Kirkbride Plan for how to build and organize hospitals dedicated to moral treatment. By the 1890s, all these institutions were under attack. Economic considerations played a significant role in this. Local governments could avoid the costs of caring for elderly in almshouses or general hospitals by reclassifying what was then called senility as a mental problem, sending these men and women to state-supported asylums. It's no surprise that asylum patient populations significantly increased. By the 1870s, almost every state had one or more asylums funded by state tax dollars. It's stated that McLean Asylum, 1811, founded in Charlestown, Massachusetts, was the first institution organized by a group of Bostonians concerned about mentally ill homeless people who were abundant in and around the streets of Boston. Also, Bloomingdale Insane Asylum, 1821, was a private hospital for the care of the mentally ill established by the New York Hospital. This site is now Columbia University.
The Kirkbride Plan design was conceived by Thomas Story Kirkbride, an asylum superintendent and one of the founders of the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, the predecessor of the American Psychiatric Association. His book, On the Construction, Organization, and General Arrangements of Hospitals for the Insane, published in 1854, became the standard resource for asylum design and management in the mid to late 19th century. The Kirkbride Plan was a linear design with an administrative building in the center and long wings on either side extending from the central building. This design allowed for maximum separation of wards so as to prevent undesirable intermingling of patients. It also allowed for the separation of male and female patients and their separation based on the severity of their illness. Dr. Kirkbride was deeply involved in the affairs of Philadelphia itself. He was a member of the College of Physicians, the Philadelphia County Medical Society, the Franklin Institute, the Historical Society of Philadelphia, and the American Philosophical Society, and an honorary member of the British Medico-Psychological Association. In 1844, Dr. Kirkbride was one of the 13 original members who founded the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, AMSA-I, serving as its secretary, vice president, and ultimately president. This was a psychiatric hospital in Philadelphia. It operated from 1841 until 1997. In the winter of 1841, about 100 mentally ill patients were comfortably moved in carriages from the congested city streets to a new, specially designed rural setting. This hospital introduced a philosophy of treatment and a level of comfort that set its standards apart in its era. It became known as the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital, located west of Philadelphia amidst 101 acres of woods and meadows. Two of the largest hospital structures and excellent recreational grounds were constructed on the campus, extending along Market Street. Thomas Story Kirkbride, the hospital's first superintendent and physician-in-chief, developed a more humane method of treating mentally ill patients there, which became widely influential. The hospital's design became a model for a generation of institutions for the treatment of mental patients across the country. The building that still stands from 1859 was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1965. Unlike other asylums where patients were chained in crowded, unsanitary wards without treatment, patients at the Pennsylvania Asylum stayed in private rooms, received medical treatment, worked outdoors, and enjoyed recreational activities like lectures and a library. The place became known as Kirkbride's Hospital. However, overcrowding became an issue at the original asylum by the 1850s, so Kirkbride pressed the managers to build an additional building. But by the mid-20th century, the 1841 hospital building proved obsolete and was demolished in 1959. The Lunacy Law of 1897 established the State Commission in Lunacy, which had the authority to oversee the execution of all laws relating to the care and treatment of patients. This law stipulated that each hospital must be governed by a 5-member board of managers appointed by the governor.
The lunacy law reforms allowed that no insane persons were to be tied with criminals, no public hearings, and the judge was not required to evaluate the confined. And these institutions were renamed hospitals instead of asylums. This was California's first mental hospital. It opened in 1851 in Stockton, California, and closed in 1995-1996. The site is now a campus of California State University. It was on a 100-acre site donated by Captain Charles Maria Weber. The legislature at the time recognized that existing hospitals were unable to care for the large number of people who suffered from mental and emotional conditions due to the gold rush, and authorized the creation of California's first public mental health hospital. On May 17, 1853, the Stockton State Hospital changed its name to California State Asylum for the Insane. They even built a dedicated building for mentally ill women. Stockton State Hospital, established in 1853, closed in 1996 and was converted into a university campus. It opened at its current site on November 24, 1891, though it had existed in other locations since 1884. The current name of this facility dates from 1986, and its original name was the California Home for the Care and Training of Feeble-Minded Children in 1883. This home housed 4 main types of residents: mentally retarded, epileptic, physically disabled, and psychopathic delinquents. Almost from the beginning, the facility was overcrowded. Agnew's State Hospital, now recognized by Santa Clara University's famous Sun Microsystems campus, was established in 1885 by the California State Legislature as a neuropsychiatric institution for the care and treatment of the mentally ill. Agnew's, opened in 1889, was the third state institution for the mentally ill. 21 years later, the greatest tragedy of the 1906 earthquake in Santa Clara County occurred at the old Agnew State Hospital. The multi-story brick building collapsed, killing over 100 patients. The site was then redesigned with a revolutionary cottage plan, with low-lying buildings spread along tree-lined streets like a campus. Today, at the center of the Sun Microsystems/Agnew's complex, there is the Clock Tower building with its massive symmetrical tower. In the 1906 earthquake, the main treatment building collapsed, crushing 112 residents and employees under the rubble. The victims were buried in a mass grave on the asylum's cemetery grounds. The hospital first opened on August 1, 1893. In 1927, its name was changed to Patton State Hospital in honor of a member of the first Board of Managers, Harry Patton. In 1889, the California State Legislature authorized the construction of Patton to provide care for those considered mentally ill in Southern California. A Masonic lodge laid the cornerstone of the original building on December 15, 1890. At the time of its creation, Patton was considered a pioneering facility in mental health care and designed according to the Kirkbride Plan, a popular plan for large asylums in the 19th century. The Kirkbride Building, as it was called, was a lavish and elaborate structure with extensive grounds intended to promote a healthy environment for recovery. Approximately 2022 former patients are buried in a field with a dirt road leading to it. These are patients whose bodies were never claimed or whose families were unknown. Today, the land is well known as a cemetery, and a dedicated mass grave marker for patients can be seen about 50 yards from the street. The cemetery was filled by 1930. Napa State Insane Asylum Hospital primarily consisted of a 4-story, 7-tower, castle-like stone Gothic structure. These towers were visible from the rooftops of Napa. It's claimed that this facility was built to relieve overcrowding at Stockton Asylum, the first state hospital. Construction began in 1872, and it received its first 2 patients from San Francisco in 1875, and the construction of this impressive stone, iron, and glass complex took only 3 years. The hospital's original design was for 500 beds. Its population peaked in 1960 with over 5,000 residents, but steadily declined over the years due to changes in treatment and admission criteria. The website states that the initial 192 acres were purchased from a land grant owned by General Mariano Vallejo. Eventually, through land acquisition, the total acreage would reach over 2,000 acres. It extended from the Napa River to the ridgeline east of the current Skyline Park. Initially, it was called the Napa Insane Asylum, and old maps identified its location with the words Insane Asylum. Later, the name was changed to Napa State Hospital, but to locals, it was called Imola. This impressive stone castle was demolished in the early 1960s and replaced by drab, unremarkable buildings of a then prevailing design. It's claimed that the massive Gothic structure, also known as the Tartarian Moor Building with its 7 towers, was designed to house only 500 mentally ill people due to overcrowding at the Stockton Insane Asylum 200 miles south of Napa, and that they had a fully functioning farm and an underground railway system. The remains of about 5,000 patients from Napa State Hospital are interred in a mass grave at the Church of Inspiration. From the early to mid-1920s until the early 1960s, patients were no longer buried on hospital grounds, and no bodies have been exhumed from Napa State Hospital grounds. Due to limited burial space, a crematorium was built at the hospital in the mid-1920s and used until sometime in the 1960s. The story reveals Judy Zerfus, who was searching for the grave of a relative who died in 1919. Her search led her to a seemingly empty field on the sprawling grounds of Napa State Hospital. Judy, a genealogist, began her search this summer for the burial site of Henry Shebby, a distant relative who died in 1919. Judy saw the letters NSH on a portion of Shebby's death certificate indicating his burial site, but she was unsure of the letter's meaning. She said, "I asked a friend about it and he said, 'What about the state hospital?'" Judy called Napa State Hospital to inquire about her relative's burial location and said her request was initially met with royal stalling. Her search concluded when Napa State Hospital staff allowed her to view a ledger of deaths initiated in 2002 by patient rights advocates at the state hospital. This ledger, part of the California Memorial Project, records the names of approximately 45,000 individuals who lived and died at 10 state hospitals. This site was used as a burial ground for indigent patients from about 1875 until the early 1920s, and the eastern portion of the campus holds 4,368 bodies, according to Deborah Moore, Public Information Officer at Napa State Hospital. The large oak trees there may have been present when the last Napa State patient was buried there around 1924. Although the site once had wooden grave markers, today an outbuilding and an unused calf barn from decades ago sit atop this seemingly empty field. Now we know that the cemetery held 4,368 bodies, 5,000 bodies were cremated, and 45,000 people died on California State Hospital grounds, yet the peak occupancy rate of patients in 1960 was said to be only 5,000 out of an original 500 people. And as you'll see below, many of these massive buildings had cemeteries and crematories on site, as well as farms. These were likely used to house the Tartarians before killing them after they had been separated from their children well up until the 1930s. Mendocino State Asylum for the Insane was established in 1889. On December 12, 1893, the hospital was completed and opened to patients, receiving 60 patients from Napa State Hospital that same day. 2 days later, 60 more arrived from Stockton State Hospital, and on March 25th, 30 came from Agnew State Hospital, bringing the population to 150. So there was too much overcrowding in Napa and Stockton asylums, which is why this asylum was needed. The original main building, completed in 1893, was razed in 1952. Folks, this story isn't just historical information, it's a story that could change our perspective on everything. There's something hidden in history, and entire civilizations have been erased. Was everything we knew about the world just a big lie? Think, research, and don't accept any information before you scrutinize it. This was an exciting and mysterious episode. Stay tuned for a new episode where we unravel another mystery. Peace out.